I quit my job. Like, I told them people it was time to go. I had nothing else to give them. I had no more benefits to gain from them. And mentally, I was clocked out months before. Hey guys, I just came to tell y'all the story about how I quit my job. Like, I told them people it was time to go. I had nothing else to give them. I had no more benefits to gain from them. And mentally, I was clocked out months before. So let me give y'all a backstory. I started nursing school in 2021. 2022, August, I graduated. And I also got a job as a PCT on the unit that I started working with as a nurse. So I gained that job and I was able to do like more skills than a regular tech at that moment. And then once I passed my boards in September, I started working as a nurse in October. So my very first experience was like, okay, it was cool because I had already knew the flow of the unit because I was a PCT. I knew the coworkers, I knew everybody. So I kind of knew what I was getting myself into. Now, nursing in these hospitals, they have this thing where you have to do, new grads have to do a residency program. Just remember that. So the residency program is once a month, you have to go to a meeting for 4 hours and you just talk about things that you're going to see on the floor or things that are not beneficial to even the floor that you're on. It's really a waste of time. I don't know why they do it, but it's a requirement now pretty much for most nursing jobs. Either way it goes. So remember that in the story, residency. So either way it goes, I start that job in October and I literally quit it in July the next year because it was just so much on me mentally. It became a point where I was scheduling myself 3 days in the beginning of the week, 3 days at the end of the next week. So I would have 8 days off. I was still mentally drained, never wanted to go in and was very emotional behind it. I would call off of shifts, still nothing, felt the same. I would go on vacations and I would be like, okay, cool. After this vacation, I should be fine, ready to go back to work. Absolutely not. Mentally, I was not there. What literally kept me going was that I literally built a bond with majority of my coworkers on night shift and we were like super close. And honestly, some of us are still very close to this day. That is literally what kept me going. But anyway, so I started that job and I just remember like I felt like my license were on the line. There was no help from charge nurses. Management was pretty much absent majority of the time. And I just felt like I was a new grad flying with the wind, which in my opinion, it worked for me. But what my situation wouldn't work for a lot of new grads. And it worked for me because I was always independent and I pick up things quickly and I learned and I had already knew the flow of the unit because I was working there as a tech. So those things, like me flying on my own, it wasn't that bad for me because I had, like I said, had the ability to. But like for somebody who's new, doesn't know anything about nursing, doesn't know, they just know what they've been through school, it's not ideal. So the unit was an observation unit, meaning that people from the ED will come up, they would get observed for 1 to 3 days, maybe 4, and they would either go to a more med-surg unit or they would go home because all of their exams and everything came back negative. That was pretty much the flow. So night shift, we were running 6, which I didn't understand why we would always run with 6 because we had enough staff to where we could run with 5 and be perfectly fine. But they would literally just float our staff every shift. Like we were the hospital staffing unit is what I felt like because we had our staff and then we had travelers. Like I can't think of one day that I went in and we never floated anybody. And that was the first thing that I didn't like because I'm like, why are we always floating? And then when we needed help, we could never get the help that we needed. So I truly did not like that. The second thing that I very much disliked was I felt like I got no help from my charge nurse. I remember that like one day I looked up the hall and we had 5 admissions sitting in the hallway. Like transport was bringing up 5 patients at one time. So this was right after COVID and they had a rule that before patients got brought up from the ED, they had to get COVID tested. Well, then they took away that rule and patients were allowed to just come up without their COVID test being done. Me, it was super unsafe because COVID was still very popular in this time. And these rooms were conjoined rooms. So like there was 2 people to a room. Like why would you just send some, I didn't like it, but whatever. And I remember we all just like, me and my coworkers, we looked down the hall and we were like, what the? So I just told them, I'm like, hey, like, I will get to y'all when I can. But like, it was a really busy night. And the charge nurse was nowhere to be found. Like, at least get them settled. At least, like, you know, probably start their admission questions for us. Whatever. I'm not asking you to pass meds. I'm not asking you to do, but just help. No, that was not a thing. And it was not something that was going to happen. So I didn't like that. I didn't like that management was never around. And I just felt like I wasn't supported. Like, it was just me thrown to the wolves. Granted, like I said, I caught on pretty quickly. So it makes those things easier. But like, when you don't catch on quickly, it makes those things super hard. So I'll never forget, I went to residency class one day and I ended up telling my residency teacher, coworker, whatever, I didn't know what to tell her, call her. But I ended up telling her that I was going to leave and, you know, go to a children's hospital. Nobody else knew. My unit didn't know. My friends on the unit knew, but like nobody knew that I was like leaving. So I remember getting this long message from her apologizing because she told the managers, I forgot how it even came up, but she ended up asking them, oh, she emailed them asking them why I was leaving. And they responded back and said they had no idea that I had planned on leaving. So that was a whole thing. And she ended up apologizing and she said she didn't know. She thought that I told people. And I said no, that I was still looking. Either way it goes, it worked out fine. Nobody was mean to me after that. They were just still themselves. So then after that, I remember I caught COVID and I called off work. Mind you, I caught COVID from a coworker who was sitting next to me and kept sniffling. And I said, hey, are you sick? And she was like, no, it's just my allergies. So I'm like, okay, I believed her, don't know why. Well, no, a couple days later, I can't taste my food, I can't smell. So I go to Walgreens, get a COVID test, and it's positive. Cool, so I call off work because I'm super sleepy. I can't stay up all night. That's actually funny because if you know, you know. Okay, anyways, I can't stay up all night. So I remember she called me in the office and I'm thinking she's calling me in about whatever reason. So not this. She's like, hey, you know, you're on your 6th point. You called off, blah, 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 blah. I said, well, I have COVID. I had COVID. I have a doctor's excuse. She was like, yeah, the COVID excuse doesn't work anymore. I said, okay. And then after that said meeting, the same time, she was like, but I also want you to sign these papers because you're getting a 25-cent raise. I don't want this raise. I had already knew that I was leaving. I had already applied to jobs at the pediatric hospital. I had shadowed. I had accepted the position. I was just waiting for the right time to put my 2 weeks notice in. I had already had the notice written up and everything. And when I got to my car that next morning, I literally sent over my 2 weeks notice. So after I sent my 2 weeks notice over, they ended up emailing me, asking me like, you know, why I was leaving. This was like, I think right after I left. So I ended up like writing them, telling them why I left, and I put in there, you know, about management. I talked about said coworkers, or not coworkers. I talked about said charge nurse who wouldn't help, but you know, always had so much to say. Because another thing is at that job that I didn't like was they would do chart reviews over certain things, and every week or month or so would be something new that they were looking at. So they were either looking at fall scores to make sure we had them properly or Braden scores, and she would go through and look at this patient's medication and be like, well, this patient is a fall risk because they're on this medication. And I'm like, yeah, but if you see how they move, you wouldn't think that. Like, I get what you're saying, but she would like harass me all shift until I would decide to change the fall risk score. And I had to tell her one day, I said, I understand where you're coming from, but this is my patient and I'm assessing them. And I honestly feel pretty comfortable with how this patient moves. I'm not changing whatever you want me to change. But if you want to go in there and you want to do your own assessment, go for it and chart it under your name and your credentials. But for me and my name and my credentials, I would not be changing this for you. I'm sorry. And that's illegal. Like, that's really illegal. Because I remember when I went to another interview, I don't even know how me and that manager got on it. And she was like, that is actually very illegal. And you're not even like, they're not even supposed to like come to you about stuff like that. Like making you change your assessment to make the department look better. And I was like, yeah, I actually got like pretty much harassed about that. So I mentioned all that in the letter. When I left, I remember one of my friends texted me and was like, girl, so you wrote a letter? And I was like, wait, how do you know? So the management ended up telling that charge nurse what I said in the letter, and she ended up reaching out to one of the coworkers that we were all, because we all kind of like hung out too, and she ended up telling that coworker that I hung out with what happened and what was in the letter, and they were asking me to change my letter or say it wasn't about said charge nurse. And I'm like, no, because it was truly my experience. Like, you know, that's what happened. And I truly did not appreciate what happened. And I'm big on change. And I'm big on, if you want to see change in things, you got to speak up about what happened. Like, don't just let things, you know, go under the rug. So that was the thing. And I also didn't like that because I was like, one, I was told it was never going to get out. Two, it definitely got out. So I don't even fill out surveys anymore, because if it's just going to get out, y'all might as well just ask me to my face how I feel about something. And I just remember all the negativity that came behind that. Everybody was like, the grass. It wasn't even everybody. The older, bitter nurses were all like, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. You should be careful when you leave places. You probably won't like pediatrics. Like all of this crazy stuff. And I was just like, And at first it kind of got in my head, because I'm like, dang, what happens if I do leave this job and I truly hate my next job? After that, I got to that next job. You can't tell me anything about leaving a job anymore. If it does not serve me a purpose, I will not stay. I love my coworkers at the first job, and they were the reason I even stayed so long. My second job was 20 times better. When I say our ratios were only 4, our charge nurses weren't even like, they would either work the floor or they were management. They were always helpful. It was teamwork. It was like so much better. I literally love that environment. Like if I ever was to go back to Ohio, I would probably try to go back to that unit. Like it was very, very great. Teamwork was a thing. Providers were always responsive when they needed to be. And I'm gonna tell you, if they weren't responsive, that manager that I had, she played no games. And if they were responsive and rude, oh, best believe that provider and that nurse, that provider was apologizing to that nurse that same day. So the difference is like clear. Like management makes a whole difference when it comes to your nursing career or your nursing job or whatever. Like management plays a big part. So don't let people say it don't. Every unit is literally not toxic. You just have to find you a good unit, find something that you like, find your bread and butter, and don't be afraid to leave. Like, I know a lot of people, like I was talking to a nurse yesterday in the PACU, and she was telling me how she is a neuro nurse, but she wants to leave, but she's been there so long that she's just afraid. And I told her, I said, honey, don't be afraid, because these jobs will literally, they're always there. If you want to go back to neuro, you can find your way back to neuro, but branch out, try different things. You never know what you may like. So yeah, that's just my story about how I quit my first nursing job.